I asked Sean to come out. He had spent some time last fall in Silicon Valley kind of doing the couch surfing stuff, and we talked about it several times, and I think that there's a lot of good storytelling in there that's pertinent to how we build community and how can we fill some of the gaps. You know, we hear all the time that people really, you know, when they aspire to start tech companies, that's kind of like the mecca, so to speak, and everybody wants to go there and be there, and investors tell you if you're not there, you're not going to succeed. And I think that Sean's got some really interesting stuff to share with that. So I asked him if he could kind of speak on his journeys there, and so it's all you, man.
Make sure you introduce yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Can you guys see the screen all right?
We can turn the lights down.
Dim the lights at all, or what do you think?
Dim?
It's probably good. Okay, cool. Yeah, so like Dirk said, my name's Sean Tierney. He invited me to speak just based on this road trip that I've done. What is all that? Awesome. He invited me to speak this road trip.
It's not as good because his face is already red from the sun.
Yeah, I know. And by the way, this road rash just seemingly on my face, I was telling Josh that I was shredding so hard on guitar the other day that I just melted my own face off. It's actually less interesting. It's just a sunburn. So the whole goal today is I just want to share some of the, like, there's no book academic type knowledge here. This is all purely, you know, having gotten in a car and driven to San Francisco and spent a month there, what I learned from that experience. So real quick, who am I for anyone who doesn't know? I know pretty much everyone here in the room, but I'm Sean Tierney. I'm one of the co-founders of JumpBox. This is our startup, and basically we make a technology that lets us take any piece of server software, regardless of what underlying technologies it's built on, and deploy it on any OS in under a minute. And so your Ruby on Rails app will deploy identically to your Django, Python, PostgreSQL, to your Java, Hibernate, Spring. It doesn't matter. Like, all these apps work exactly the same. And so we've used this technology thus far to basically make open source applications a lot easier to use and make them more accessible to more people, and to the people that already know how to use them, make them so convenient that they don't have any excuses not to use them all the time. And then these are just some other things. I helped organize Mark Camp. I have a blog called Scrolling on Devs, and I do the Tempe Nerd Munches. So, okay, so dive right in. If you're gonna do, so basically what we decided was, we're missing some stuff by being here, right? And we don't want to be the people who just bitch about it and complain about being here. Let's do something about it. Let's supplement what we're missing. So short of moving our company to the Bay to get some of that, how can we make up for the deficiencies of being in Arizona in terms of not having some of the networking opportunities and just getting our name out there? So we decided it made sense to just go and plant me in the Bay. I'm the most transplantable person in our company right now. I don't have a wife and girlfriend or anything. Just go be mobile for a while. So we decided it made sense to put me up there for a month and just live in the Bay and network the hell out of the Bay. And so if you're going to do this, I could have flown up there and taken public transit, but we just decided it made sense to do it as a road trip, to have a car, be mobile, and get around and be able to be my own thing up there. So I would say if you're thinking about doing this, make a plan. Like, decide why you're going. What's the intent there? For us, and it can be as simple as we just want to get in the mix. I don't know what the intent is. We just want to go up and hit a bunch of events and get out there and get our name out there. But make a plan and then do some homework ahead of time. I use some of these resources here to go map out, like figure out what was going on up there and kind of plan my trip around these landmark events. And then expose that. I put it on my blog and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to be up in the Bay. I know some people. I told them I was coming up there. And just expose what your plan is. So just upcoming is good for stuff that's going on locally. Meetups, there's tons of meetups up there. Confab is a really great site. Has anyone seen that before? It lets you see what conferences are coming up. So it's really useful. Just Google for user groups in San Francisco. Bar camps, there was 2 that were happening up in that area while I was there. The Super Happy Dev House thing was going on at the same time. Startup Weekend was actually, I was able to hit that one, which was huge. And then Facebook. If anyone, I'm sure a lot of you guys use Facebook. Yes? Just switch your Facebook to the network, to the Bay network when you do it, and see everyone who's up there. So there's all kinds of calendars and things going on through that. And then, you probably can't read, these are too small, but there's just all the list of stuff that I plan my trip around. Okay, so then you decide it's a road trip. If you can only get certain things right, get the essentials right. Make sure that you have reliable transportation. So that means take your car, get a tune-up before you leave. And, pay the $35 or whatever it is for AAA. I actually ended up using it. It was great. I had a battery die while I was out there. And being able to just get on the phone and an hour later have a new battery, it's priceless. So make sure that you have your transportation worked out. Make sure that you have your communication worked out. I got the iPhone the day before I left, and it was the best decision I could have made. And I'm not trying to be Apple fanboy, but I think the iPhone was so useful. Like the mapping feature alone justified the purchase of that phone for the trip. And they didn't even have like the geolocating stuff at that time. It was just super useful. And there's actually a slide just dedicated to what that iPhone did. Skype and iChat was really useful. Like the video conferencing aspects of being able to have our morning meetings. Kimber can tell you, I would chime in about every other morning. We do a 10 a.m. morning meeting with our company. And being able to, when you're on the road, you're kind of isolated from everyone, and you kind of get out of the loop, you feel like you don't know what's going on. And having that is just so great to be able to feel like you're still part of the team and see everyone face to face. So communication, and then sleeping, silly as it sounds, like sleeping, always having a fallback good sleeping arrangement is key, I think. Because it's the difference, having a good night's sleep on the road is the difference between being exhausted and completely ineffective the next day and being well rested and on your game. So I did it, I think I stayed on like 14 different couches over 31 days, but I always had a sleeping bag. And I'll show you, you'll see one arrangement that was less than a couch. But it's great, have a sleeping bag, and I recommend even a thermarest, something that just so you know that you've got a comfortable sleeping arrangement. And then this is just some secondary tips that I put in here. Pack your clothes modularly. This is something that I didn't do that I wish I would have. You can see here, this is a picture of the back of my truck. I don't know if it's bright enough, but basically I just took everything in my closet in a stack and threw it in there. Took a big box of socks and a box of underwear and some shirts and stuff and just kind of threw it in the back of my truck. That was kind of stupid because basically the day would go like this. You'd be doing stuff all day long. You'd probably get to where you're going to stay like at 9 o'clock at night. You're exhausted and it's dark, and then you have to go in the back of your truck and rummage around and figure out what you're going to wear the next day. And then it's like the last thing you want to worry about at that point. So I would say pack like 2 bags with a couple outfits and everything self-contained, and toiletries and everything you need, so you can just get up that next morning and you go. And just grab a bag out of your truck and go. Offsite backup system. I had one of those Western Digital hard drives. It's like $150 for a 500 gig drive. If you're using Apple, use Time Machine, and then you just always know that when you go to bed at night, plug it in, Time Machine picks up your backup, and then store that someplace other than where your laptop is. Because at any given time, you lose your laptop on the road. The worst case, you go to the Apple store, you have to get a new laptop, and then you restore it from that, and you're back in business. Some of these other things like that, I think tunes are incredibly valuable on the road, whether you're just walking around or whether you're driving. So I got one of those car charger / FM modulator things so I could listen to music. Books on tape. I listened to a whole book on the way out there, which really made the 14-hour drive go by quick. Bring some change for parking meters. An extra laptop battery is pretty useful. If you get to like a coffee shop and there's no power outlets, or they're all taken up or something, or you're just out in the middle of nowhere and it's scary. Obviously extra business cards. And then paper map directions. As ubiquitous as connectivity is and stuff, there's no substitute for just having a folded up piece of paper in your pocket that has the directions for what's going on that day. It's just a fallback that I recommend. All right, so this isn't exactly scrappy. This is like the best couch I stayed on. This was in Newport on the way back. You can see the ocean right there. But you can do this cheaply. I did the entire trip for just over $2,000 for 31 days up in the Bay, which is really cheap. So this is why I mentioned the less than hospitable sleeping arrangement I had on the floor of a garage one night due to a mix-up on someone whose house I was staying at. I got halfway in, right? I got through the garage and then mix up and open the interior door. So I just said, screw it, I'm sleeping on the garage floor. And that turned into a whole thing. But bottom line, as long as you have a sleeping bag, you can go anywhere and you're set. So. All right, this is, how many people here have ever lived abroad? All right, so do you remember when you went what that first period was like when you got there. Like I lived in Ecuador for 6 months, and I just remember when I got there, there was at least a week or so where I still felt like an outsider. I wasn't integrating, and I wasn't, it was like I was treating it like I was an extraterrestrial in this place and kind of on vacation, and ooh, this is interesting. And by the end of it, you're completely integrated, and it's like home, and you're telling other people where to go and making recommendations. And so somewhere in between there's this transition where you go from being like an outsider to it's your home. And I think one of the, just like the mindset things that's key is to pretend like you just moved to this place and you are now living there, and treat it like it's a home now. And you'll just approach things differently than if you're thinking, oh, I'm just visiting here for a couple weeks and I'll be gone. And you just see it differently. So the connections you make, if you just treat it like, hey, I just moved to San Francisco, just treat it like that, and you'll just integrate that. Okay, parking. So I'm not encouraging to break the law, but when I got there, I went 6 days, just out of sheer not thinking, oh, I got to pay to be on the curb at night. I went 6 days before I got a parking ticket, and then I realized parking tickets are $35. It costs $20 had I been paying for these spaces. Do the math. If you can make it 2 days without a parking ticket, you're ahead. So I'm not encouraging anyone to get parking tickets, but actually I am. It's cheaper. It was way cheaper to just take the fines and not actually pay for parking. So and that's in San Francisco, but it's probably different in other places. This is interesting. So one of the arguments I think for doing it as a road trip as opposed to flying somewhere and staying in a hotel and taking transit around in cabs and stuff, I think it's just like the road trip and the pilgrimage aspect of it is actually a very good conversation starter. And you want to have all these little matches that at any given point you can just talk to someone and strike it up and be like, yeah, I drove out here and this is what we're doing and this is the company we're starting. And it makes you more interesting. Like fact, when you're somewhere else, you're more interesting. Fact, when you're doing something that you truly believe in, you're more interesting. And put those things together, and I think you have a very just powerful way to meet people. I put this quote, I don't know if you can read it, but this is one of my favorite books, actually my favorite book, The Alchemist. I think there's something to that. I think that when you're just going for it, it's just doors open up for you. So let the story, let just the fact that you're out there and you drove out there to make it happen, just that will let you naturally talk to a lot more people, I think. Okay, so here's where it gets into the kind of touchy-feely stuff. Serendipity, whether you believe in it or not, I think no one can argue that adage that luck is like when opportunity meets preparation. Do your homework, prepare, make connections, tell your connections that you're coming, have them talk about you, and weird things will happen. You will meet people. These are the, I had actually done a podcast with these guys. This is Robbie Walker and Wayne, I don't know the name, Wayne Crosby, Robbie Walker, the guys who founded Zenter, and they had, GoDaddy.
Yeah, I worked with both of them.
Yeah. So I had done a podcast with them beforehand. These are the guys that wrote Zenter in 6 months and got it acquired by Google for something like $10 million. And so I got to go tour Google and see their facilities and meet these guys up there because I let them know that I was coming. And then just reach out. This is Mark Fletcher of Bloglines and Yahoo Groups. So I had a beer with him. I had read his story in the Founders at Work book. And I just reached out to him, and I'm like, hey, I love what you did. I wrote this thing on you. I really, you're kind of an inspiration. You want to have a beer? Sure. And it's just like things like when you never know until you ask. So go contact the people that would seemingly turn you down, and you never know what's going to happen. I think, so document your trip, right? Do it in real time while you're there. It can actually change your trip. Don't look at it like, I'm going to go and I'm going to write about it afterwards. As you're doing it, write about it. And the people that you meet, if they want to follow you and track what you're up to, it helps you, one, capture what's going on and really cement some of these things and remember names and places and the memories, but it also helps others track you. And so I have a blog, and I just kept, I post every few days. I tag it with SF Road Trip, and the people that wanted to see what I was up to, they could follow along. And good things came from that. Has anyone read this book? Yeah. What'd you think of it? Good. So the biggest takeaway for me in this book is this equation. It's this, we always hear viral ideas. You think of like the message needs to be viral, it needs to spread. And everyone's focused on the spreading aspect. And this book to me was very much about, yeah, that's fine, you need that component, but it's only, if this is 0, then nothing. Like it's only as effective as its ability to stick with the host. And so building on this, yeah, bring business cards, blog, have an interesting story to tell, whatever, but the thing that makes networking effective, really it's about one thing, and it's about connecting deeply with people. And that impression that you leave and what the connection that you share and the memory, and being able to email that person later and say, yeah, remember that night we were at so-and-so place, that connection is what it's about. And you make yourself stickier the more deep that connection is. So really just, it's all about focusing on that. This stuff is completely just supportive of this. And the relationships, right? I mean, so these are the girls of Under the Radar that we had met, that I met when I was there, which led to this, us presenting at Under the Radar, which led to other connections. This is the guy who writes the OK Dork blog, if anyone has seen that before, Noah Kagan. So I corresponded with him and met him while I was down there. These are some of the people that organized the startup weekend there. I've stayed in touch with a lot of them. And obviously Twitter is a really good resource here. Everyone has a Twitter now, so exchange that. Okay, so this is important. Ed knows this house. This is Francine Hardaway, really big local partner of Ed, big in the local scene. She let me stay at her house. She wasn't there, but this is her house in Half Moon Bay. Gorgeous house. This is like the view blocks away from the beach, and just amazing. So she's like, use my house. Here's the keys. Go and have it for a couple of days, as long as you need it. And when you reach out and they honor that request, say thanks. Do a favor for them back. It's just that's how it works. Okay, so iPhone, I think, is a double-edged sword. I think it's awesome. I think that the mapping, as I said, the mapping feature alone is worth it right there. For me, it didn't even have the geolocation, and it was worth it for this alone. But just, having tunes anywhere, being able to not drag your laptop around and meet people and walk around a conference without a laptop, but still get to your web and email. Having an alarm clock, not having to bring an extra thing, photos, calendar, all that stuff. It's good for all this. It can hurt you, I think, or at least I've noticed myself. I sometimes use it as a crutch in social situations where I'm not entirely comfortable, and I get there, and the easiest thing to do is just to bust this thing out and put your head down and check email or whatever. So if you use it for that, if you find yourself doing that, just put it back in your pocket. If it takes you out of the moment, it's not helping you, but it's good for all these reasons. So just be aware of that. This was my favorite coffee shop. This was Pete's Coffee in Palo Alto, and I worked here for probably 5 or 6 days straight. They have awesome, I like tea, and just the best tea that I've had. But coffee shops are great little embassies. You go and you find, and they've got everything. You'll drink power when you're living off of a battery. You get to a place that's like getting to the well and replenishing your battery. The place. They've got good Wi-Fi, drinks. There's just activity, kind of the same reason that you guys like working at Gangplank. There's a lot going on. There's just a good vibe. Usually close proximity to good food and just interesting people. Random person sits down next to you with the same laptop. Immediately you have something to say, hey, nice laptop. So,
which Pete's was that?
It's the one right next to the Apple Store in Palo Alto on that main drag. I don't remember what it is.
University.
Yeah. So here's just a slide. We met with a couple VCs while we were up there. We hadn't intended to. And the big takeaway from that is, yeah, they have these big, daunting offices, but they're people. They're not. This isn't actually a VC. This is our lawyer, but he introduced us to a lot of VCs. They're just people, and if you're going to go up there for that purpose, I think you can psych yourself out a little bit, worrying that the VCs, these big, untouchable people, they're people that need deals, that need to fund companies and back smart people like yourself. So this goes without saying, but save all your receipts. It's aside from the good bookkeeping that you want to do for your company, it helps you reconstruct things after the fact. You remember, oh, what was that little cafe that I was at? You find the receipt for it, and it helps you put that back together. You figure out your spending habits. you can go, and I don't care what projection you make right now for a trip, it's not going to be it. But you will know exactly what it is after the trip if you keep all your receipts. So,
what did you forecast?
I thought it was going to be closer to about $3,500. So we were way under budget on it. Yeah. Yeah, and so $2,000 for 30 days in San Francisco. That's not too bad. All right, so here's something that I kind of want to propose, and Josh, we've talked about this. This idea that really, like, there's enough companies that would stand to benefit. Like, this was a very positive thing for us. It worked really well. Just a lot of good contacts came from it. And I could see if we had enough connections up there, and even Dick, we talked about this, like the idea of having a safe house up there. But a series, like what was really cool is that you get, for 3 days, you live with someone and you get to know them and they introduce you to people and they put you up at their place. And it's like, I can envision some type of exchange program thing where, you can host people here, although I don't know why they would want to come out here necessarily. But if we could get a couple places up there to be able to run a circuit and put people through, a 30-day tour of the Bay where they can meet people, I think that'd be killer. I really think, I don't know exactly how to make that happen at this point, but I can see that being really good.
But until then, if anyone is up in the Bay Area, they can use Francine's house. She's in Half Moon Bay. Sean already pointed that out. Great house, and it's whether Francine's there or not, it's available. And when she's not there, Brian Schiller's usually there. So.
Did you work at any co-working facilities out there? Because there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, I didn't, and that's an excellent suggestion.
Because if you're looking for a tour, like to get introduced to a lot of people, you can get into most of them are free, especially if you're not from around there and they have a fee. You can usually say, hey, I'm going to be here and I'd like to stop by just to see, and they'll usually let you stop by anyway. Right. But they're all over. Palo Alto's, there's a couple. Actually, there's one right by the coffee shop there. Actually, it's Cooper Coffee's right down the street from there. But then there's down San Francisco, and so it's kind of the birthplace of it anyway. There's a ton of places that you can stop and work, and there's always anywhere from 4 to 20 people in those places that you've never known before.
Yeah, that's an awesome suggestion. That I didn't really know about the whole, honestly, Gangplank is kind of my first introduction to what a co-work environment is. So I hadn't really known about it before then, but that's huge. I'm sure there are resources like that. Someone should do almost like a My Maps or Google Maps thing with those locations. That'd be really neat. All right, so I mean, that's pretty much all the slides I put together, but if anyone has any questions or is thinking about doing it, obviously feel free to email me, or if you want to talk about anything.
What was your biggest benefit from a business standpoint? Like, did you meet the connection that ultimately funded you, or did you, just get the priceless business card out of it? Or?
I would say the experience of having gone through the VC process, even though we ended up not doing it, it gave us a lot of confidence. We pitched some really big companies, and Kimbrough flew up and we talked to some people, and that process was good. And
enormously useful if we decide to do it again.
Yeah. Like if we were approaching it from scratch now, what we learned is invaluable if we decide to do that and do it again. So that, and just contact. I mean, I can't. The network effects of meeting people. Like here's one. Meeting, Scoble, introduced via Francine, go on his show, but then end up seeing him in Pete's, 2 days later, and then getting invited to this, other event where he's there, and this guy Daniel Lewin from Microsoft, big investor guy, and like all these pieces that just you see how intertwined everything is there, and just getting into that fabric and being a part of it. That's.
And also, you met the Under the Radar Girls, which led to us getting into the Under the Radar Conference, which gave us a fixed date to launch the JumpBox Open subscription, which is the growth driver for JumpBox's revenue. So it was, you kind of have to tie the points together to get to where it is. But it was a huge benefit from that.
Absolutely.
Also, last night you mentioned that now when you go talk with VCs, you're not as intimidated. Could you kind of explain them a little bit more to everybody? I really thought that was quite helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so we haven't really talked to any since then. We've been approached. We haven't actively been seeking it, but we've been contacted ourselves. And it's just more of a demystification of the process. You know, when anytime you haven't done something, I think there's an element of just fear to it. And now that we've done it, we know what to expect, and we know what their hot buttons are and what they don't want to see. And
yeah, what I kind of gained from what he was saying was that now he kind of understands that he's an equal with them. At first, when he went in there, he was feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to pitch them this, and what they say is really going to be the end-all be-all. But in the whole process, from what I gathered from what you were saying was, you know, these people want what I have, and you go in there like that, realizing that you're equal, then it tends to go over much better.
right.
The big thing to understand is that they're a business, right? And they're in the business of investing in companies, but they're ultimately a business, and they have money that they have to put to work, and they have to put it to work in a certain way. And if you understand that, then it makes the relationship a lot easier.
And it actually is unequal in your favor when you really think about it. There's lots of money out there. There's very few really great ideas with great entrepreneurs behind them. And if you have that great idea, the great company, or the great entrepreneur, you have the upper hand. That might not seem like that, but
And the VC process was fun. I mean, we had a great time just going, and we went meeting to meeting, and in one day, and just pitching the company over and over again. It was just a lot of fun to talk about it, and, you know, throw around ideas and whatever. And we ended up not raising money that way, but it was a great experience.
I think it's all about how much you put, like, how much weight you put on that process. Like, if you think that you have to have that, and you're so ingrained in, well, I've got, this is the end, if nobody funds me, I'm screwed, and you put so much pressure on yourself that it seems like this daunting task, where I think for, like, your situation, you're out, you were kind of running it around, but you didn't have any real expectation.
Right.
And it was a learning process, and it was kind of, whatever kind of attitude, right? Okay, well, if it happens, that'd be great, but we're already kind of moving along anyway, so, it doesn't have nearly the pressure. So I think that, to the point you made about relationships too, is that the relationships work in the VC area, right? If you can establish a relationship, it's like sales. People buy from people they like, and people invest in people that they like, and they invest in people that they know, and so you have to establish that relationship. And if it doesn't work, it's not. It's not personal either. That's another issue that I think a lot of people have, this personal connection. If you don't like my idea, you're saying I'm stupid because I have a bad idea. But in reality, it's just they just don't understand. They're busy, or stars don't align.
And I know with at least one of the meetings, the fact that I had driven out there was actually, they want to see your skin in the game. And that's what better testimonial than, yeah, I figured out a way to make this work. I'm doing it for as cheap as you can humanly possibly do this.
Yeah.
So they like to see that.
So you felt the need to go to San Francisco to fill a gap, right? It's kind of what you said, fill a void, fill a need. So after spending your time there, can you express what that gap is? Because I think a lot of people say, you need to be there, you need to go there, you need to do that, but they can't express what it is that's missing, that's there, that's not here. So what gap needs to be filled here so that people don't feel the need to have to necessarily, leave Phoenix to get their needs met?
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so there's also there's a gap, but there's also advantages to being here, and that has to be stated. That sure, there's a lot of advantages for being up there, but there's also, like, we probably couldn't have started the company that we did up there. Whereas here we're kind of like, we can do it cheaper. We're a little bit cooler of a company and less, less common. We're a startup here. There's not many cool ones to be a part of. So there's that advantage. But the gap that I saw, what we don't have is this fabric. Like, when in walking around, and I think it's partially a function of, like, having all these smart people close together, just walking around at lunch, seeing each other occasionally and talking. There's something to be said there. There's dialogue that occurs and connections that are made that just don't happen here. Surely by the fact that we all live all over the place and we drive everywhere. And so the way that we're combating it is we do things like these groups and hack nights and Tempe Nerds and Refresh and these things to make up for the fact that we're not all just walking around talking to each other. As far as how we make up for it, I think that's how we make up for it. I think I don't see us changing like dramatically the landscape of where all the businesses are located or anything like that. You know, you get things like SkySong that are trying to bring companies into close proximity and create some of that, but I don't know that that's the right way. I mean, I honestly think that Gangplank has a better approach than something like a top-down, the way SkySong is doing it.
So do you really think it's necessarily a proximity thing in physical location? I mean, you know, when I was working up there, you had, you know, Mountain View, which might be close to Palo Alto, but it's really not close to downtown San Francisco. You know, you've got Cupertino, which is really not that close to either San Jose or Mountain View or Palo Alto or San Francisco. Yet those people or circles of influence seem to be transparent to there. I think there's, you know, is there a proximity of people, not necessarily location?
I'd say it's concentration. There's
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
a
it's like a
concentration
nucleus.
of people, like-minded people in all of those areas.
It's also a high concentration of technology companies. And I can give you a concrete example of how this worked, not from this particular trip, but from another trip when we were in the Bay Area. We were staying at Francine's house, which is in Halfmoon Bay. And then the night we were at Francine's house, I got an email from VMware, and VMware is one of our biggest partners. And this was our first introduction to VMware. And they reached out to us, and we're like, well, we're in the Bay. We're actually going to be, they're located in Palo Alto. We're going to be in Palo Alto at our lawyer's office the next day, which was 2 blocks from VMware's office. And it was like, okay, let's set up a meeting. It was our first face-to-face meeting. And, you know, it's just those kind of things don't happen here because the companies are not here. And there's just this concentration of tech companies, and it's just, you can go, you know, one place to another in one day and actually, and work on a business level, work on all kinds of different deals. It just doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
And there's no way to replicate that.
Yeah, the face-to-face component, I don't think, there's just no substitute in terms of trying to make up for it with online stuff.
And it's not necessarily the geographic proximity, it's just the dense concentration of so much stuff there. It's like a rainforest, it's just a really diverse ecosystem. It's a huge rainforest, but there's so many different species all right in the same area that it's very easy to find what you need and to bump into what you need.
So, I know you mentioned that you might be relocating there, but then you put that on hold for a while. You still got plans of going, ditching Phoenix and rallying the Bay?
Answer the question. I refuse to answer the question.
How bad do you think Phoenix?
No, we haven't. Yeah, let's see the signs. We haven't made any decision on that. We put it off. And like I said, as much as we have some problems with, you know, we complain sometimes, like there are advantages to being here. And you can get some of this connectivity and deals just by planning yourself up there for 30 days straight. I don't think it would have worked had we organized like 3 back-to-back trips on the weekends. I think that you just have to be there. That there is something about getting into the community and seeing people on the street and talking to them and having them say, you need to meet this guy, and seeing him at the party the next night. And there's just there's no substitute.
I think that the important thing that you said earlier was that it's not, and maybe I'm paraphrasing to a certain extent, but it's not about the number of relationships, it's the quality of the relationships, right? That you can't just go and meet somebody and then be like, hey, hi, my name's Steve, hi, okay, great, and you're out. You have to establish connections. You have to establish some way of maintaining that beyond that moment that you have that interaction, and that's, if you can do that, then that relationship lives on when you leave, right? So you can come all the way back here or go all the way back to the East Coast. It doesn't matter how far you travel, once you've established a relationship that you can then call on and that they remember. And so I think that's the thing about your trip that was the kind of the remarkable thing about it, is making long-term relationships that you can then go back to. I mean, I don't know what it is about San Francisco either. I went there for work, and I spent 2 weeks there on a project with the guy that was the developer there. And every day we went to somewhere, either co-working or we went to a coffee shop or whatever. And I met 3 or 4 people who, when I started looking for a job, they got wind of it and they sent me like 10 or 12 job offers from different companies that they knew of. And I didn't even know them other than that moment.
Yep.
So it's just something about like the expectations of relationships that they set too. Like,
So that's kind of like I've been trying to piece together in like to me, I don't think it's got anything to do with proximity. I think density makes serendipity happen more often, but I think the fundamental difference to me after spending quite a bit of time up there is the way relationships are viewed are totally different. Okay, when I come to something in Phoenix, usually people only go to a meeting that has some functional value, right? Like we put all this emphasis on like it's a Rails meeting or it's a this meeting or a that meeting, and that meeting has some purpose, and I'm going there to get some value out of that said purpose. And when I introduce myself to another person, it's what can I get from you? Their respective, what can you get from me? Vice versa. And when you're in the Bay Area, it's just about, hey, we're people, we're hanging out, and half the time you're not even talking about technology or anything else. You're at a pool party, or you're shooting pool, or you're at the bar, or whatever. But that connection is made, and it's like, okay, I know that Sean does JumpBox, and all he's told me is that he works for JumpBox, and they do virtual machines. I know nothing else about it, but we went out and we had the best time playing volleyball. And a month later, Robert Scoble comes up and says, something about virtual machines. I said, I know a dude that like knows everything about virtual machines. Now, like I have no idea what he really knows, but like, hey, I know he's the virtual machine guy, and because I have that connection with him, I call him up and say like, hey, you really need to do Scoble's show and do this. And I just think that it makes things happen so much quicker because it's a personal level instead of an obligation level. And so if you ask somebody to come and present and you know them on a personal level, or you ask them to do something, it's like, sure, no problem. It's not even a discussion, right? Where, when you don't have those relationships, everything is so much work to make anything happen. And I feel like, the things that work in Phoenix are the things that work because the relationships are there, and that you don't have to work super hard to actually make them happen. They happen because the people in the relationships want them to happen.
And that, and the other real big difference in the Bay Area is that startups and technology are the norm. And so if you're doing a startup out there, it's no one goes, oh my God, how strange is that? Here you can still get out of that.
There's a lot more tolerance for risk.
Yeah. The whole cultural attitude to startups and technologies is very different, and because of that, it's a lot easier to get stuff done because you don't have to. You're not an outsider. You're part of. You're part of the team. All kind of.
But I don't know if that's not mitigated by a couple of companies having some sort of public success here. I mean, I think that we haven't really had a real standout success from this area yet, or even moderately, big. I mean, that's not to.
We do though.
Huh?
We have a few companies that are fairly sizable. I mean,
Well-
Limelight is a public company, and
Yeah, but who talks about them?
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of people now they're delivering all the content for the Olympics.
Yeah, I don't think anybody really knows it. See, the thing about Limelight is that they're such a distributed organization. It seems like a global company just because of the way that they provide service. It's
Right.
not like.
But they were still
there's
founded
no
here.
Well,
Twitter's
wait,
and
wait.
stuff, right?
Who here knows the name of the CEO for Limelight?
I don't know it
The
anymore.
Well,
I know the CTO.
But I'm just saying. I mean, there's no visibility to
And that might be a
companies
problem
that
with the
are
area.
here.
I mean, that might be, in fact, the big problem is that whatever successes we do have, we don't have any media outlets that give a crap in this area. I mean, nobody ever reports on that kind of stuff around here. We have like page 10 in the Business Journal, a little picture.
Has anyone heard the name Alan Kaplan?
Yeah, I know Al.
I mean, just show hands. I mean, what, 2 or 3 people here? The guys raised what, probably over $500 million of venture capital for like 4 different companies locally. One of them was huge was a big sale. The other one, Limelight, which is a public company. And it's amazing that an entrepreneur, and he's a quiet behind the scenes type of guy, but anywhere else, I think the press would have picked it up by now. That this guy's created a lot of jobs, raised a lot of capital, had some very successful companies, and some spectacular flameouts too. But that's it's one of our.
He funded the first company that I co-founded, and that was a flame out big time.
but Alan, someone is out here doing what people assume is normal in Silicon Valley, but no one really notices it, which is I always found that kind of extraordinary.
So if you did another 30 days, how would you rock it? What would you do different?
That's a good question. I don't know much of what I would change from the trip. I'd probably go with the same You know, go with the openness and go try to do it cheap and just look at your iPhone less. This is like is the best thing I can say. Like, just talk to the guy sitting next to you or the girl behind the counter because they know someone who. Yeah, well, actually, before this is one quick story that you made me think of, and what you just said. The idea of making one deep connection and not even having contact for a while. So I went to a party that he'd invited me to, met some guys that happened to work at VMware. Long story short, a month ago I had a call with the largest telco provider in Europe that was interested in JumpBox and potentially doing a partnership with us. It came out of that, and some guy that remembered, you know, me from a party contacted me and said, yeah, you know, I want to introduce you to this company. So it's just that type of stuff, you know, at a place you least expect it, a house party, comes at this valuable connection.
This is a thought that popped in my head where like the whole media outlet thing, I can't remember who said it, but I feel like a lot of the other companies that we've been talking to lately where we're kind of asking them about that type of stuff, and I think a lot of web people think that they're smart, that they're doing some high-tech, sophisticated, cutting-edge stuff, that they have it all figured out. And then I go say something that seems like really new and innovative to me, that it's a company that's not web, and they're like, yeah, we've been doing that for decades, you're retarded. And I think that media thing is a big one of them that, to me, like for a long time, I've really resisted a lot with the idea of like just simple press releases. It seems so backwards and a waste of time and inefficient. But then you have these companies that are pumping out press releases like nobody's business, and they get talked about.
Yeah.
Like they're the ones doing the pushing. It's not like media companies waiting, like, oh, we don't want to talk about you. I don't think that's what's happening. I don't think it's like that there's some gatekeeper saying no to you guys. It's just it seems like a lot of web and tech people don't rely on those traditional stuff because they think it's out of date.
Right.
And then there's a lot of companies that just, they're not pushing news.
There's some of that, but the local media is horrible covering business, let alone tech business.
Yeah.
If you looked at the Arizona Republic business section, you wouldn't know there was anything happening in town business related.
Real estate.
Yeah, except real estate. So, but agreed, your point's valid, but you're working in a very hostile environment to start with.
Yeah.
Being here.
So, but to the point about relationships there, you know, we met Ty Young, we met Andrew Johnson at some of these events, and we stayed in touch with them, and they wrote about us because not because we were putting press releases out, but because I could send him some things like, hey, you know, I saw that story you wrote the other day, you might be interested in these guys. Send them some stuff. Don't even think about yourself. Just think about hooking somebody else up. And then when you have something, they're going to be much more receptive to you.
And that is a huge point, because even on his trip, Sean was trying to do favors for other people. He stopped a major war between me and the under the radar people, and because of that, you know, he left a good impression with me, with Debbie, and everything. And so, you know, it wasn't just, hey, what's in the trip for me? He was looking at how he could give, and that's a huge difference.
Yeah, I think you even pitched our company.
So we'll get you a camera crew, and we'll do 30 days Boston.
No, I want to do like 30 days Rio and 30 days. There's got to be a BC there somewhere.
I know this is kind of outside of your specific topic, but what do we do? Like, what can we do to start changing things in Phoenix to where we're doing these things, right? We're building the relationships and we're getting people to talk about what's going on, and whether it's traditional media or even new media, right? How do we get people interested in what we're doing?
Right.
Well, maybe
so I
press
think
releases might have been a bad example, but like that there's effort getting put into getting
I
stories
agree with what you're
told.
saying, right?
So
Like,
it's kind of-
we're not, nobody's going to talk about us if we're not talking about us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It certainly can't hurt to just spout more and to be more vocal. As far as what we do, so locally, I think it's two-part. I think something like this, I just don't think you can deny the value of the Bay. We can't just pretend like we're going to make it without having some presence up there. So I think something like this that gives companies, that supplements it and lets them get up there. And then locally, just if the concentration is the key, I think having these events, really supporting, you know, what we're already doing with Gangplank and Tempe Nerds and Refresh and these type of things, to just make a high concentration and then try to pull in a reporter to that. You know, I try to, neither one of them came for some reason, but you know, pull in. We got Esther Schindler here, who is like one of the big writers for CIO.com, and you know, she wants to make it out. I know she's going to come out to one eventually, but getting people to physical events, I think there's no substitute, whatever the best press release you write is not as good as getting a person to one of these refresh events and exposing them to all these things that we do.
But at least from the reporters that I've talked to and dealt with, like they don't even get it, so they have a hard time of conveying that to their audience.
Yeah.
You know, how do we help them get it?
Yeah. Man, that's a tough one. I don't know.
I just put it out there. I don't think we can solve that
What
right
Rod
now.
said, though, reporters aren't necessarily the people that need to know. I mean, every business has certain people that you're trying to reach. There's probably more effective direct means of reaching them than having to go through the general press. And so, you know, what is the community that you're trying to reach, and who do they listen to, who do they pay attention to? More likely, it's a blogging community nowadays. So, you know, reach out to the people who actually matter and who can reach the people we're trying to reach.
Well, I think some of the problem is, like, if you look at the Bay Area, the original founders in the kind of early 70s all spun out of the same spot. Okay, and so since they all came out of, you know, Stanford and Palo Alto and that area, basically the founders all kind of knew each other. So you've got this, like, that woven web from the ground up, right? In Phoenix, everybody is either a transplant or like independently built themselves up. They didn't come out of a think tank or kind of an environment that's spread out. So you've got, you know, a bunch of guys. So you've got I mean, when you say like, hey, this person's doing this great thing, and then you go to a room like this and say, how many people even have heard of that person? And 3 people raise their hands. I think that's half of the problem. Is we're not interlocking everything that's going on here. I mean, I think we do have some good startups that have been here that have had, you know, even international success, but we're not interlocking with them, right? They're not interlocking with other companies. And how do you start to get those webs together to the point where...
That's kind of been the thing we've lacked here, is we haven't had that big company that's really succeeded and then has spun off all the little companies around it. Although if you look at Limelight and you trace Limelight back through its history, we have had relative strength in that industry here.
Right.
Because Limelight traces all the way back to PrimeNet and then
Yep.
through Genuity and GoodNet and a number of other
Well,
companies in that.
and part of me says, is it a time thing? Like, I see this happening with GoDaddy. I mean, most of the people that were originally with GoDaddy have gone off, spun off, started to do their own things, and started to basically ply out into the mesh or to the fabric. And it's not uncommon now that you see people. We had this discussion the other day about the Opnix folks, right? Like, I mean, you know, that we're starting to see this where companies are kind of either built and get to a certain level and then break up, or are super successful and then the founders break off and start new businesses. And so we're starting to build some of that fabric. But I guess the question is there a way we can accelerate that? Is there a way we can start to get people who are already there to try to weave some of those relationships together instead of having to wait 15 years for several companies to build up and fold or build up and spawn off to get that kind of...
I think you're doing it. I mean, 20 years from now, people will be talking about, oh, that Gangplank. Wow, amazing how much stuff came out of that. I mean, it just, you never notice it when it's early, because it's early.
Yeah. But we need to step back and think about, you know, where we are today versus where we were 2 years ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
I agree 100%.
I didn't know anybody in this room 2
Yeah.
years ago.
Well, you guys were one of the first people that I really met that were doing cool stuff with technology in Phoenix.
Right.
And that was awesome.
So we've come a long way already, but
Does anybody know like the history of, I mean, the San Francisco thing, like what's considered the start and how big is the, you know, how quickly did it become a national phenomenon? And are we trying to create something, you know, instantly that takes 10 years, 20 years?
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you look at, everyone looks at Phoenix as this huge place, but it's so new that a lot of the history, the infrastructure, a lot of the connections, people will be everyone from somewhere else. I mean, San Francisco is relatively new on the scope of things, but they beat us by 100, 150 years on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we happen to, we're just this giant toddler, that we're comparing ourselves to like these, middle-aged cities who have, already a lot under their belt. So, I mean, I think for where we're at in the timeline, we're actually doing pretty good. It just seems disappointing compared to the actual size of the place we're in.
Yeah, and the fact that we're overcoming some of the really, like, I look at places like Boulder and like Portland and some of these little, there's just a lot going on in Seattle, and there's just enough culture there where it's naturally a draw for the people, the types of people that are going to do startups to want to be in those places. And Phoenix is not devoid of culture, but it's just not as interesting as those places. And so the fact that we are able to do stuff like this is overcoming that. It's impressive that we're able to overcome some of that challenge.
Well, I think culture grows out of that. I mean, the cultures that you talk about in those cities didn't just appear overnight. It came from some group of people coming together and doing something, intentionally or not, you know, doing something, and then it naturally progresses and grows out of that. So there's no reason to say that there won't be a culture that grows out of what we're doing here,
Yeah.
and some of the other movements that are happening.
Definitely.
And also,
let's just throw this in there. I think cross-pollinating is a big important thing. Like, I see things like First Fridays, which is this amazing. I don't know how many people have been to First Friday. Okay, good number. Like, making them aware of us and us aware of them, and that whole thing just takes these little kind of nucleuses and then groups them together, and then now it's a bigger nucleus and it draws in more people. And, just diversity. It's not all about tech. You know, it's creativity. They're the artsy angle of it, but it's awesome vibe. Great.
I know, I was just gonna make the snide comment of like early San Francisco. They were all the gold rush people running out there looking for opportunity. The early people in Arizona were, you know, farmers and cattle people, and then military. And up until even 50 years ago, there wasn't much here. You know, and San Francisco was already like a major city then.
Even 20 years ago.
Yeah, even 20 years. Yeah.
I remember as a kid there wasn't a
And
whole lot.
yeah, and you know, a lot of people who came out to Arizona aren't necessarily the same people that would have, you know, ended up in California. It's just, you know, a lot of the sprawling subdivisions and stuff, you know, people wanting to get away from versus being dense in a city. But I think with that, there's enough people here that you can easily get a critical mass if you keep doing what you're doing. And I think it's a whole different brand of entrepreneurship and attitude that, you know, every area has its strengths and weaknesses, and I love the strengths we have.
Yeah. And a drawl and a hat. Boots and spurs.
Great. You first.
But your great question of the difference in the history of the areas, you know, leads to different things, but it doesn't mean that we're predetermined for one or the other. We can change it.
We do have a major geography problem. The city is just so spread out that that's going to be a real challenge to overcome, because we can't. There's been like starting to be little pockets that appear every once in a while, but they don't ever really take root and grow. I mean, Tempe has a number of companies now. Scottsdale Airport for a while was looking like it would be a good place, and now out here in Chandler is, where are we, Chandler? Gilbert?
Depends on which side of the room you're standing on. Sean's in Gilbert, you're in Chandler.
So there's, you know.
And I'm only half kidding.
So it's just kind of, you know, there just hasn't been that place where it's taken root, where there's that concentration even in our environment, and it's tough. I mean, it's hard to get to events that are so spread out. Whatever. That's gonna be a tough thing for us to overcome.
I was just kind of talking with him, and we were talking about this last night about TechCrunch and whatnot. Why don't we, everybody, I don't think anybody else would be interested, but if we came up with a website and then we just put stuff about tech in Phoenix.
If
only we owned
Yeah.
Phoenix Tech.
I don't know, I just think that might be a good idea.
Oh, we do.
Isn't that what Tide is trying to do? Kind of like Arizona.
We did at some point.
Yeah,
Huh?
but then he's like full of it.
On phoenixtech.com.
But he's,
sounds like we
he
did.
is,
Yeah.
I mean, he can't write everything himself, so he's looking for other people to contribute.
I got his card last night, huh? Is that the guy?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the AZ Hoopla, was that the name of it?
As a project, we tried to do that, where I set up a blog that was an aggregator and tried to get everybody else to feed it with their tech news. And
I didn't even know about it.
Let me ask a question here. How many people here have heard of Flypaper Studios?
Just recently.
Just recently. How many people knew that they just raised $3.6 million in venture capital?
But
And-
do you know who raised
Pat Sullivan, right?
I think he's the CEO.
He is, but he wasn't a founder of the company. But
But
again,
it came in before the raise.
this is another local startup. They've raised $6.6 million in the last year, and hardly anybody's known. This is like just, there's a lot of companies here. I'm surprised how many tech companies there are here.
They're not really going for the norm, like, from what I understand, white paper, actually I really don't quite understand it, but, I don't think that they're hitting the masses with it.
Reinventing Flash
Well,
or something.
Yeah.
But let's just start talking about these people, right?
Well, the point is that they are a local tech company. I mean, they are a technology company. That's what they do, and they're a product company, and venture capital funded, and I have never encountered. I mean, I know a couple people from Flypaper, mostly because Sean had brought them in for interviews for the Grid 7 podcast. But you never encounter their employees. You never.
And so, I mean, I think some of not to toot a horn, but the thing is interesting is like Patrick actually came to Gangplank a few Wednesdays ago. And what's it? Junior,
Okay.
right? And I think that's some of the testimony to trying to build and weave that fabric. You're absolutely right. Is people don't get out and mingle. People tend to stay in their own silos of where they're at, and I guess that's kind of my point. Is we put together all these events that are specific to like I'm trying to get something by going to this event instead of like hey, I'm just trying to meet the people. Like if you go, there's circles in Silicon Valley that are I don't want to say it's like the in crowd, the not in crowd, but I mean there's very much that almost like high school kind of feel to it. I mean, not to be campy, but I mean, and you don't really get that here. It's like people just want to shut down when they're done with work. I mean, I just want to shut down and go home, take care of whatever. And some of it's geography based, right? Like, I mean, driving an hour to go to something is a pain in the ass.
Yeah, I don't think changing people is gonna be the way that it works. I think it's gonna be finding the people that are receptive to that.
Well, I tend to go one step further and say I think we're offering people the wrong things. Meaning, I think people want to belong to community. I think people crave it. The problem is we're not offering them anything worth them giving their time for. And to me, what works there doesn't necessarily what's going to work in Phoenix because of our geography, because of other things. So how do we get creative and start building that fabric in a way where people want to participate? Because I think people want the benefits. They're just not necessarily seeing the lure that we're putting out is being valuable to them.
I think sort of related to all that is we put way too much weight on our events and companies. Like people saying like, where's the company that's going to bring a draw to Phoenix? Or like, you have to go to the events, because you do. And like coming from, I moved here from New Jersey. It's been the last 2 years in New York and in Philadelphia. And walking cities helps so much. And I think like regardless of, we all want our companies to benefit and flourish, and we want the events to be worth going to, and they are. Like, it's all about people, and I think like there's a dude that I met 2 Phoenix Friday coffees ago that I had no idea did X at Y company, and I was like, oh, but your Twitter name is XYZ, and it's like there is a huge disconnect, and I think Phoenix relies on the technology and relies on the companies and relies on the events way too much. And I think like what you're saying is you could walk down the street on your way to lunch and meet somebody, and like those things are something that I know I personally miss. And I think that like what Kimber was saying is like that geographical handicap is definitely hard to get over, because otherwise you have to do all your meetings at an event to a degree.
Yeah. And short of moving every company and agreeing that we're all going to be on, within 3 blocks of each other, I don't know how we combat that for now.
The way I see that, though, the way I see that problem being solved is those are just the way to start. That's the way to astroturf the community, right? And then real relationships start to form around that. Oh, I met so-and-so at a meeting, and now we're going to go hang out, tonight or this weekend, or and you start building those real social networks of real friends.
Sure, but it adds weight to the event. It's I don't know. I think that what you did is very interesting, to go and immerse yourself in a completely different environment and location, because you learn that much more about how you are handicapped.
Yeah, that's the external component as far as what you can do here. I mean, we're doing it. This is what you need to do. Cool. Well, it looks like we've gone on for about an hour, so if there's no more questions, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for